The prospects of a ceasefire in Ukraine faded a bit last week after Russia launched one of the deadliest attacks on Kyiv since last July. Saturday, President Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy sat down together at the Vatican prior to Pope Francis's funeral, their first face-to-face meeting since February's Oval Office debacle. Trump later issued a social media post saying that maybe Putin doesn't want to stop the war and is just tapping him along. On Thursday, just hours after that attack on Kyiv, we spoke exclusively with Russia's foreign minister, Sergey Lavrov, and talked about the potential components of a peace deal. European sources say that the U.S. proposal is really just kind of a list of bullet points. Does Russia have details, the details you need at this point, in terms of a formal proposal?
We are really polite people. And unlike some others, we never discuss in public what is being discussed in negotiations. Otherwise, negotiations are not serious. To ask for somebody's opinion regarding the substance, go to Zelenskyy. He is happy to talk to anybody through media, even to President Trump.
The National Security Advisor, Mike Waltz, said last month that President Trump is asking for thousands of Ukrainian children who were taken into Russia to be released now as part of what he called confidence-building measures. What steps has Russia taken to meet Mr. Trump's request?
Look, long before the request coming from Washington, we have been addressing the issue of the fate of the kids who, during the conflict, found themselves outside their homes, outside their families. Most of these kids were attending what you call it, the place where people without parents...
Orphanage.
Orphanage. And as soon as, and we announce whatever details we have about those kids, and as soon as the parents or other relevant relatives make themselves available, they're getting the kids back. This has been the process for the last almost 3 years between the ombudsman of Russia and Ukraine.
So there's no new release of thousands of Ukrainian children at the request of President Trump?
No, nobody knows why some experts advise the president about thousands of Ukrainian children. Every now and then, once in 2-3 months, we organize exchanges with Ukrainians with the help of Qatar, Saudi Arabia, United Arab Emirates, who do not, make any noise about what they're doing. They just do something which we are participating in a very constructive manner, bringing kids back to their parents or relatives.
Do you take President Trump at his word when he says if Russia is unable to make a deal on ending the bloodshed in Ukraine, he'll put secondary tariffs, I think he means sanctions there, on oil coming out of Russia? Or do you think that at this point, the relationship between Russia and America has been rebuilt and that won't happen?
Well, I cannot comment on what you think President Trump meant when he said something.
What do you think he meant when he said secondary tariffs on oil coming out of Russia?
Well, we hear many things coming from President Trump. President Trump said that he's sick and tired of the situation in this settlement. And President Trump has his own proposals and has his own style in mentioning those proposals in his public speeches. We concentrate, as I said, on the real negotiations which President Trump supports and instructed his people to continue to engage in these negotiations.
Broadly speaking, when you look at what's happening in the battle space in Ukraine right now, analysts say about 18% of Ukrainian territory is under the control of Russian forces. U.S. intelligence says battlefield trends are in Russia's favor. So if that's the case, why should the U.S. believe Russia is serious about ending the war if everything is in your favor?
Well, we judge by the reaction of our American colleagues to what we tell them. And this is being done during negotiations. They're confidential as any serious negotiation. And they know our position. And Marco Rubio, he publicly said that now they better understand the Russian position and the reasons for what is going on. And he said that nobody in Washington lifted a finger to do the same, to understand, to try to understand Russia during the Biden administration. And this implies that the dialogue continues, that the dialogue is supported by the United States, and I reiterate that it is supported by the Russian Federation, and this dialogue continues.
So President Trump said he expects to meet soon with Vladimir Putin. What's an acceptable time and location? Why should they meet?
Look, the presidents are masters of their own destiny and of their own schedule. I heard President Trump say that he is planning to be somewhere mid-May, and that after that he would be suggesting some dates. I cannot add anything else.
But you think it would be good for the two leaders to meet soon?
We're always in favor of meeting with people who are ready for a dialogue. President Putin repeated this thousands of times, and when we met in Riyadh, together with President Putin's foreign policy advisor Ushakov, with Marco Rubio and Mike Waltz, the American colleagues clearly stated that the U.S. policy is based firmly on U.S. national interests. They understand that the Russian policy, led by President Putin, is also based on Russian national interests, and that it is the responsibility of great powers to make sure that whenever those national interests do not coincide, and this is in most of the cases, this difference should not be allowed to degenerate into confrontation. And that's what dialogue is for. But they also added that when the national interests of two countries or of more countries coincide, it would be stupid to miss an opportunity to translate this coincidence into some material, mutually beneficial projects. And this is absolutely our position.
You know that President Trump is coming up on 100 days in office, and he has made clear his patience is wearing thin with the diplomacy here. Do you expect the U.S. and Russia to continue to talk after these potential peace talks fall apart?
Russia is always available for a dialogue. So you have to address your question to the American side. Second, you prejudge the current process by saying that eventual collapse of the talks. We concentrate on doing business, not on thinking, failures or victories about anything.
We'll have more of our interview when we come back. Welcome back to Face the Nation. We return to our conversation from Thursday with Russia's Foreign Minister, Sergey Lavrov. Others in the Russian government have proposed that the U.S. and Russia could work together in the Arctic. Are there specific areas of discussion for cooperating right now?
You always want me to disclose
this
things,
is a public statement.
Things which might be discussed by respective officials of Russia and the United States, by those who are responsible for trade, economic cooperation, investments, and so on and so forth.
I'm asking what you think the potential is.
I read President Trump's book, The Art to Make a Deal, and he doesn't advise to disclose information before it's time.
Respectfully, President Trump speaks quite a lot about the things he would like to do with Russia and opportunities to work together. I understand you don't want to. On the specific things President Trump has said in public is that the U.S. could work with Ukraine to operate the largest nuclear power plant in Europe, which is in an area, Zaporizhzhia. Russians control that area right now. Do you agree with President Trump's public statements that the best security would be for the U.S. and Ukraine to operate that together?
No, we never received such an offer. And if we do, we would explain that the power station, Zaporozhye nuclear power station, is run by the Russian Federation state corporation called Rosatom. It is being under monitoring of the IAEA personnel permanently located on the site. And if not for the Ukrainian regular attempts to attack the station and to create a nuclear disaster for Europe and for Ukraine as well, the safety requirements are fully implemented, and it is in very good hands.
So that's a no.
No, I don't think any change is conceivable.
Okay, because that was in a public statement from the White House to the media.
We as I said, we did not receive any proposal which would be specific.
I just want to be abundantly clear, because that is also widely reported to be in the U.S. proposal currently on the table.
Why don't you ask me about President Trump's position on Crimea?
You liked what President Trump said about Crimea when he said that it had been under Russian control since 2014?
It's not about liking or disliking. It's about the fact that he said the truth.
President Trump said Crimea is not even being discussed right now.
Yes, because this is a done deal.
You mean Russia occupies and controls and will not negotiate the future of Crimea? Is that what you're saying?
Russia do not negotiate its own territory.
Back in January, Russia signed a deal with Iran to become a strategic partner. Would Russia be willing to sever that relationship at the request of the U.S. if it meant better relations with America?
There was never any request like this, and we welcome the process which was initiated between the United States and Iran.
Would you keep Iran's enriched nuclear material that they've made in the past few years? Is that an offer to the U.S.?
We are not putting our nose in the negotiations between two countries, one of which is not Russia. We welcome the dialogue between the U.S. and Iran. We would be certainly ready to help if both parties believe this is going to be useful, and they know that we are ready.
I want to ask you quickly about nuclear weapons, because Russia is such a nuclear powerhouse. According to U.S. intelligence, Russia is developing a new satellite meant to carry a nuclear weapon, which would knock out other satellites and devastate the U.S. if it's used. That's in publicly published material. Does Russia intend to violate past treaties and actually put a nuclear weapon in space?
Well, before asking this question, you have to check whether this is true or not.
This is what U.S. intelligence says.
U.S. intelligence, I was listening to President Trump about his views of what is the list of achievements of U.S. intelligence, and I have my own facts on which I rely. We have been promoting for many years in the United Nations a resolution prohibiting putting any nuclear weapons into outer space. The country which is categorically against it is the United States.
Are you saying the Trump administration's intelligence community findings are incorrect in regard to Russia developing a new satellite meant to carry a nuclear weapon?
We denied those allegations. I cannot comment about the validity of the intelligence reports, as I told you. We never received any facts which would confirm the allegations.
Do you have any interest in arms control talks with the United States, with the Trump administration?
If the United States is willing to get back to this track, we would see what are the conditions under which this might be possible. As long as in the U.S. doctrinal documents, we are described as adversary when the officials in Washington some time ago called us enemy. So we want to understand what Washington thinks of our relationship and whether Washington is ready for, I would emphasize once again, an equal, mutually respectful dialogue heading to finding a balance of interest. If this is the approach, everything is possible.
You can watch our full conversation with Foreign Minister Lavrov on our website and on our YouTube page. Just search Face the Nation. We go now to New Hampshire Democratic Senator Jeanne Shaheen. Senator, President Trump repeated his threat Saturday to look at potential sanctions on Russia. Senator Lindsey Graham tweeted he's got nearly 60 co-sponsors for a sanctions bill. Yet in our interview, Minister Lavrov basically said their economy is self-sufficient and sanctions don't matter. Are they actually leverage at all?
Well, I think we ought to take up the Graham legislation and we ought to pass it through both houses and put those secondary sanctions on Russia. And the fact is, I've been watching Minister Lavrov for 16 years since I've been in the Senate, and he is very adept at talking a lot and saying nothing. And in that interview, as we know, he refused to acknowledge Russia's aggression into Ukraine. He refused to acknowledge that it's Russia that's firing on the Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant, not the Ukrainians. He refused to acknowledge the children from Ukraine who have been disappeared into Russia, kidnapped there. He does not, he's an excellent prevaricator who never takes a position that is in opposition to what he believes is Russia's interest.
Fair summary there as to his abilities to evade direct answers, but he did directly answer on the sanctions bit, saying, trying to brush off these threats. Given the vote count, do you think that you could actually get this to be veto-proof, that you could force President Trump to put these sanctions on Russia and get congressional leadership to actually allow you to vote in the first place?
Well, I do. And I think, in fact, the administration has been working with Senator Graham and certainly understands that this is legislation that is in the works and that there is some real benefit as Vladimir Putin continues to drag his feet, to do everything he can to play for more time so that they're able to take more territory in Ukraine and to better advance Russia's position. This is something that can help slow them down.
I want to ask you about the oversight roles you have on some of the committees you serve on. At the State Department, Secretary of State Rubio announced a major reorganization this past week with plans to reduce staff by 15% eventually. It will also condense certain bureaus or eliminate them. One of them is the Office of Global Women's Issues, and I know you have personally worked with many of these diplomats. Can Rubio just eliminate it with the stroke of a pen?
Well, I noticed that one of the things in your polling that people were not happy about was the actions by the administration without oversight and advise and consent from Congress. And this is what this administration is talking about, what Secretary of State Rubio is talking about. They're talking about going in, making these changes without really consulting with Congress. The reason we have an Office of Global Women's Issues is because what we know about foreign policy is that those countries that have women who are empowered are more stable. We know that women give back more to their communities, to their countries, to their families than men do. And there's a good reason why we have an Office of Global Women's Issues, because it helps us as we think about our foreign policy. And it's been one of the advantages that the United States has had over our adversaries like China and Russia and Iran.
And it had previously received support from the president's daughter, Ivanka Trump, who I know you worked with during that first administration.
I worked very closely with Ivanka, and she was very supportive of the Office of Global Women's Issues.
We'll watch what happens to it. I need to ask you about Armed Services, a committee in which you also serve. A number of political appointees at the Pentagon have been fired or resigned in recent days, which means the Secretary of Defense currently has no chief of staff, no deputy chief of staff, and no senior advisor for policy. Does it concern you that he doesn't have this kind of architecture around him? And what is Congress doing in terms of oversight?
It concerns me greatly that he has created chaos in the Pentagon. The fact is, Pete Hegseth was not qualified to take the job as Secretary of Defense, and he has shown that time and again. He showed it with his sharing classified information on a signal chat, with the recent sharing of information again with his wife, with his brother, with his lawyer on a signal chat. Inappropriate to take classified information and then share it in an unclassified source with people who do not have the credentials to hear that information. He has created chaos that is now embroiling our uniformed military in the chaos that he's creating at the Pentagon without having the appropriate people to run things. And he's not taken responsibility for his actions. And for those people who serve under him, he has shown that he is not the kind of role model, not the kind of leader that we need at this time.
Very quickly, it's sensitive information the Pentagon is looking into through this Inspector General inquiry, whether it was classified. Do you have any idea when you will get a clear answer?
I don't, and I think it's important that that's a bipartisan request to have that investigation done to see what was appropriate, and hopefully they will come out soon with recommendations. You know, one of the concerns that I raised with the Secretary of Defense was what the tariffs are doing to the supply chain for our Department of Defense. We know that the Ukraine war showed us that we have some real challenges with our defense industrial base. Those are being made worse by these tariffs. I was at a company in New Hampshire last week that does ball bearings for the aerospace industry. They told me that because of the tariffs on steel, that what used to take them 20 weeks to get steel, they're now having a 2.5-year backlog. That puts a real strain on our Department of Defense.
And I know you've sought more information on that. Senator, we'll have to leave it there for today. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back in a moment. We're joined now by President Trump's border czar, Tom Homan. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning.
We see in our polling some support for the president's policies here. We know that overall border crossings are at the lowest monthly level we have seen. Just over 7,000 migrants came across in March and were apprehended. But given the fact that you're still waiting on Congress to give you funding, do you think that's going to handicap your ability to carry out these policies?
Well, look, I think we've been very successful, and we got the most secure border in the history of this nation. And President Trump was able to accomplish that in 7 weeks. That's something that Joe Biden wouldn't do in 4 years. But yeah, the more money we have, the more we can do. The border is the most secure it's ever been in the history of this nation, but we need more funding for interior operations, ICE operations, to arrest those public safety threats, national security threats, and others from the United States. Again, the numbers are about 3 times higher than they were during the Biden administration as far as ICE arresting the interior. But with more money, we can do more.
Well, let's talk about what's happening on the interior. On Friday, there were 3 American citizen children born here who were deported along with their mothers from Louisiana down to Honduras. And according to advocates, one of them is a 4-year-old child with stage 4 cancer, a rare form of metastatic cancer, who was sent back to Honduras without getting to talk to a doctor and without medication. I understand this child's mother entered this country illegally, but isn't there some basis for compassionate consideration here that should have allowed for more consultation or treatment?
Well, it certainly is discretion. I'm not aware of the specific case, but no U.S. citizen child was deported. Deported means you got to be deported by the immigration judge. We don't deport U.S. citizens.
The mother was deported along with the children.
The children aren't deported. The mother chose to take the children with her. Now, when you enter the country illegally, and you know you're here illegally, and you choose to have your citizen child, that's on you. That's not on this administration. If you choose to put your family in that position, that's on them. But having a U.S. citizen child after you enter this country illegally is not a get-out-of-jail-free card. It doesn't make you immune from our laws. If that's the message we send to the entire world, women are going to keep putting themselves at risk to come to this country. You know, we send a message. You can enter the country legally, which is a crime. That's okay. You can have due process, great taxpayer expense, get ordered moved. That's okay. Don't leave. But have a U.S. citizen child and you're immune from removal, that's not the way it works.
So you don't think there should be compassionate consideration for a 4-year-old child undergoing treatment for cancer?
I didn't say that. I said
that was a question.
ICE officers do have discretion.
Yeah.
ICE officers do have discretion. I'm not familiar with the specific case. I don't know what facts surround this case. I've just made aware of this when you mentioned this morning. I was not aware of that case.
On Friday, a federal judge who was appointed by President Trump said a 2-year-old American citizen child had been sent to Honduras with the mother who was deported. But the judge said, quote, there was no meaningful process. So again, this is another similar situation and dynamic. Shouldn't there be special care when these deportation cases involve small American-born children?
Well, first of all, I disagree with the judge. There was due process. That female had due process at great taxpayer expense and was ordered by an immigration judge after those hearings. So she had due process. Again, this is parenting 101. You can decide to take that child with you, or you can decide to leave the child here with a relative or another spouse. Having a U.S. citizen child doesn't make you immune from our laws of the country. American families get separated every day by law enforcement. Thousands of times a day when a parent gets put in jail, the child can't go with them. These, if you're an illegal alien, come to this country and you decide to have a U.S. citizen child, that's on you. You put yourself in that position.
Well, when it came to this particular case, you just pointed out that they could have made arrangements. The father tried, actually, to make arrangements, as we understand it through our reporting. But he and the mother, who were separated since she was in detention after showing up for her appointment, was only allowed a very brief phone call. The father tried to petition to get the child handed over to an American citizen relative. So the mother had to make this decision and took the child with her. It just seems like there could be some more time frame here around due process allowed. That's what the judge is saying there should have been more of a process here.
There was due process. The 2-year-old baby was left with the mother because the mother signed a document requesting her 2-year-old baby go with her. That's the parent's decision. I don't think the judge knows specifics of this case. 2-year-old went with the mom. The mom signed a paper saying, "I want my 2-year-old to go with me." That's a parent's decision. It's not a government decision. It's a parent's decision.
The father wrote a note. Anyhow, we have to leave it there. Director, thank you for your time today. We'll be right back. Pope Francis was laid to rest yesterday in Rome. Our Chris Livesay has our report.
Benedicta tui mulieribus.
Of all the world leaders coming to the funeral of Pope Francis, no one raised both more tension and excitement than President Donald Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy. As the funeral for Pope Francis progressed in St. Peter's Square, we met Olga Vilsanka from Ukraine.
He always said, please pray for Ukraine. Please remember the suffering people of Ukraine.
The papacy has always been a political as well as a religious institution. Pope John Paul II used it to speak out against communism and is widely seen as having played a role in the fall of the Soviet Union. Monsignor Karl Castell, who's lived through 7 papacies, says Francis was just as outspoken.
Not everybody liked it, but whether it was the President of the United States or the President of the Russian Federation or whoever, he would say what he thought was the right thing to say for the Pope.
In 2016, while returning from a trip to Mexico, that meant speaking out against U.S. conservatives over mass migration when he said, "A person who thinks only about building walls is not Christian." Then candidate Donald Trump fired back.
For a religious leader to question a person's faith is disgraceful.
Francis and his social agenda will no doubt be on the minds of cardinals when they elect a new pope next month.
In the recent past, we've had several cases of popes who have had enormous political influence as well. It all depends on whether or not they're listened to.
It's a point not lost on Vilsanka from Ukraine.
Do you think that in Pope Francis's death, that at this very funeral, peace might eventually come?
God willing. God willing.
Zelenskyy said his meeting with Trump could be historic if they achieve joint results. Hours later, as President Trump was flying back to the U.S., he took to social media to blast Russian President Vladimir Putin for firing missiles into civilian areas.
That was our Chris Livesay in Rome. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. Until next week. For Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.